I've just taken an overview for you, a summarization of where we're at, where we need to be, and where we're going, type of thing. If we can put all those together, just kind of gives you kind of a nice little picture. So we're taking it from a rather basic prospectus at this point, but just kind of share with you some of the information. So this is our latest photo board of our staff, and you see the bottom ones are our newest additions. We haven't updated it yet, but it just kind of gives you a sense of the pride that our officers take and our staff takes, all of them, with being part of the agency. We'll talk a little bit more about that once we get into the presentation a little bit or further. As far as who we have working for you, some of their background, and then more importantly, kind of gives you an overview of the tenure and the ages that we have. To paint the big picture, we have a pretty young department, and we'll share some of that data with you here in a second. We also have some photos for you just to share. If you haven't had the opportunity to take a peek at some of the tools that we use, this is the cruisers we have. So we're driving Tahoes now. We came to the commission back in roughly 2010, I think it was, and we talked about the needs because the traditional police cars were being eliminated from the Ford fleet. So we used to drive the Crown Victorias that had the great big trunks, and the reason we need the great big trunks is because we carry a ton of medical gear, as you can see in the photo on the right. That is the back end of every one of our cruisers, quite honestly. So all of our cruisers are equipped with medical equipment. We have shields, ballistic shields in a number of them, but then we also carry all the other emergency equipment that's required. The front seat kind of gives you a picture of what our officers, what their office looks like, as they spend the majority of their time within that office setting. So they certainly have changed over the years. So now it's pretty technological inside of our cruisers now, and it's because of these two guys that keeps the things up running. There are gurus when it comes to the IT part of it with the computers, the radios, and all that good stuff. The next one gives you an idea, it gives you kind of a glimpse of what our detective unit looks like. If you have not been to the agency, back behind the records area there, we have an area that is our detective wing. This just kind of gives you a snapshot of a couple of the offices. They're not that large, but they make good use of the space. Our detectives do a very nice job out of the offices that they have. The next one's our detention cells. I think you've maybe all had an opportunity to go back there, but if not, this is the detention area that was built when the building was built almost 30 years ago now. We used to have overnight lodging. We used to lodge prisoners for up to 72 hours. We soon discovered that because of sanctions and rules and mandatory this and that, it was not feasible for us to maintain a detention cell anymore. We had to have medical staff on. We didn't have any food for the prisoners. So we maintained the cell still, but this is just a snapshot of two of the bigger cells. These are multi-person cells, and we use them now specifically for court days. So when we have court on Tuesdays is our busiest court day. All transports from the jail are lodged in these detention cells, one male, one female. So we continue to utilize those. On the back side of the photo is our one-person cell, or one-man cell as they call them. They don't get utilized too often, but we have one in reserve. So if we get that special visitor that doesn't want to work with us and comply with us, we put him in a segregated area, or him or her in a segregated area. But the rest of the one-man cells are used for storage at this point. Our basement briefing training room, this is where all of our officers meet for the beginning of their shift. So just to kind of give you an overview, and we'll talk about the primary shifts and our overlap shift, but our primary shifts meet down in this room here at either 6 a.m. in the morning or 6 p.m. for the day shift and night shift respective. Down in this room here is where all information is shared by our sergeant. So the briefing activity takes place during this time. We usually spend about 15 to 20 minutes depending on the material that needs to be shared with our officers, and it gives the sergeant or the supervisor, whomever is running that shift, an opportunity to provide that information, share information, and any concerns of the shift. So this is down in our basement area. If you haven't had a chance to get over into the building, down in the basement is where our briefing room is located. All of our shifts are churned out from this room here. And then last but not least, this is our evidence room that we are very proud of right now. If I would have showed you a picture of this room 4 years ago, you would be astounded because we are we were overwhelmed with evidence and property within our evidence room. Back in 2016, we hired a part-time property custodian, and he comes in 8 to 10 hours a week usually, Keith. and he comes in and basically stripped this room of evidence. So if you kind of get a glimpse of all these shelves, that's one shelf of probably 5 sets of shelves in this room. When we first hired Steve Kozera in to do the property custodian, this room was filled. Every shelf was filled from top to bottom, and most of the floor space was filled with stuff that hasn't been purged in many, many years. We never had a dedicated property custodian. We always utilized our sergeants, or we had our dispatchers back in the day that were responsible for this. One of the kisses of death in our field is if you don't have a nice, tight, clean property room, it's a problem. So we put a priority on that. We had Steve come in under Keith's supervision, and this is the end result, and it's extremely efficient now, and we're in great shape. We continue to do audits on it and inventories of it, and everything is really, really tight for us, so we're in good shape. The next slide just gives you a sense of what the hierarchy looks like. So it's a flow chart that we use to help share information as to what the structure of the police department looks like. Everything has a flow to it. So as you can see, underneath myself is Jason, and then from there we have different responsibilities and areas of responsibility. Some of the new areas was the one I just talked about with the property room custodian. He works very, very part-time, but he works under the supervision of Keith. Keith's also responsible for our patrol sergeants, who trickles then down to our corporals and our officers, and he also oversees our detective unit, with our detective sergeant running the day-to-day operations of that unit. Jason takes care of all of those as well, but then he also is responsible for our administrative sergeant. That was Troy Myers till he retired last month. And then, of course, underneath Troy, we have the 2 support services police officer positions, one being our court officer that works in the 59th District Court, and then the other one is our community liaison school officer, as many of you know, is Officer Mitch. And then below Mitch, we also have our volunteers, we have our chaplains, and then we have our student interns. We also have our office manager, kind of the rock of the agency, Barb. She's been with us for over 25 years, and she runs the day-to-day operations of the office environment. And then she's also the oversight of our records unit. And I'll talk a little bit about our staffing levels in the next slide here. So today, this is where we're at. We have 38 sworn police officers. So when I say sworn police officers, we are the ones that are commissioned under the state with law enforcement authority. I'm a sworn officer, and it goes all the way down to our newest police officer hires. So we're at 38 sworn staff, 3 of which are administration, us 3 here. We have 6 sergeants. Of those 6 sergeants, 4 of them are assigned to patrol. So we have 2 on days, 2 on nights. And then the last 2 is a detective sergeant and our administrative sergeant. We have 4 corporals, and I'll share a little bit more information on that here in a minute. But our corporals were allowed to fill those back in 2017, and those corporal positions today proves to be extremely beneficial. And it was designed for a couple different reasons. The most prominent one is to get our staff ready for movement in the future. So it's been very successful with our corporals. We have 4 detectives, 3 of which are general case detectives that work out of our office, the picture you saw earlier, and then we have 1 assigned to the Sheriff's Department in the drug unit, Kent Area Narcotics Enforcement Team. 19 of the 38 sworn are patrol officers. Those are the ones assigned to the street through the different shifts we'll talk about here. We have 2 support service officers, the court officer, our community resource officer, 5 civilian staff, 5 of which is our records. So we have Barb, who's the office manager, and then she has 3 records clerks that does the data entry for us, that does FOIA, that works the front window, does gun registrations, etc. So those 3 are very, very busy as well. And then the last one is our part-time property custodian. We have 8 right now on our roster for our RSVPs, which is the Retired Senior Volunteer Patrol, our volunteers. But we're losing them pretty quickly because they're getting older as well. So we're continuing to try to encourage new participation on that unit. But right now we have 8 of them, and they're committed to 3 days a week, and they're pretty consistent when it comes to that. They come in and do a variety of things. You've probably seen them at many of our community events, but they do much more than that during the day in the police department, whether it be running files for the court, doing property checks for us, and they also do handicap parking enforcement. So they're doing a lot of the logistics part of it for us. We also have 4 chaplains still on our volunteer unit. So we have 4 chaplains that continue to assist us with both officer wellness, but then also community engagement when it comes to the need of the community under that guise of a chaplain or pastoral services. Personal data, here's what I was going to share with you from earlier. So right now, as of today, our average age of sworn personnel is 36.6 years old. So out of our 38 officers, our average age is 36.6, and our average years of service is 12 years. Of those 38 sworn officers, just shy of 48% have less than 5 years on the department. So once again, we're a very young department when it comes to tenure. But as you've met a lot of them through the years of being sworn in, we have some super talented young people that are coming on board with us that want to come on board with us. We're very fortunate there. So that just kind of gives you an idea, the numbers. Today, we have 19 patrol officers. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what our shifts are. When I say primary shifts, our primary shifts are that 6 a.m. and that 6 p.m. shift. So as of today, we did some restructuring, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but we have a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. where we are assigning 5 officers and 1 supervisor to each day shift. So if you can picture this, we have 5 officers on shift and a supervisor, and then we also have 5 officers that are off shift with their supervisors. So you actually have 2 different day shifts, if that makes sense. 1 shift's on, 1 shift's off. So, and then they rotate on that 12-hour schedule. On the night shift, we continue to have 4 officers on, and that 1 supervisor, same scenario. 1 shift is on, 1 shift is off. Then we supplement both shifts with our overlap shift. Here in a second, we'll talk about that. The reason we do this is our patrol contract's still in place where it allows 1 officer off. So the reason that we moved the extra officer, as you can see, down to the day shift is we were experiencing difficulties with staffing day shift of all places because whether it be sick call-in, vacations, trainings, or extended leave due to injury or FMLA, and we were running below our minimum standards and our minimum staffing levels. Minimum staffing levels is 3 officers plus a supervisor on every shift. So we had 4 officers assigned day shift, and we had 1 go off on an approved vacation, and then 2 o'clock in the morning, the night shift sergeant receives the call from the other day shift that they're sick. We're scrambling then to fill that day shift squad with the minimum staffing. So we're holding over officers that worked 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., which if you ever work nights, 12 hours at night, it's hard. So we were trying to get that eliminated, so we did some reallocation with the overlap shift, and we moved an extra officer down to each day shift. And since we've done that, we've been in really great shape. Luckily, knock on wood, we haven't had any extended leaves, injuries, but we're ready. So with this extra officer, we can address that when it does happen. So as you see, we have minimum staffing of 3 plus the supervisor. That's by contract as well. Corporal position, we talked about corporal. So this is what, just to kind of give you some background for those that might not have been on the commission when we started the corporal position. But it was identified, or it was created after we identified a critical moment in our department where about 4 years ago, we were coming up on a 4.5-year mark where 67% of our command staff's eligible to retire. As we stand here tonight, I'm eligible to retire, he's eligible to retire. He not so much yet, but getting close. So we see that coming. So we see that, that the need for being prepared for that succession planning is a necessity. So we decided to go with the corporal for a couple different reasons. We had corporals back in the early 90s. In fact, I served in the capacity of a corporal back then. And I found it to be extremely beneficial. Personally, I gained a ton of experience, confidence, and competencies by being a corporal back then. So we brought them back under that same idea of getting our officers prepared, getting our staff prepared for the succession, and then more importantly, the confidence building and developing them to soon step into these roles. Once again, the intent was to provide the proactive succession planning and staff development. The nice thing about the corporals is they're still within the police officer's bargaining unit for contract, so they fall into the same rules when it comes to taking time off, bidding shifts, and most importantly, we didn't have to create a separate union. We didn't have to create a separate rank structure. They fell right into the same rank structure as the police officers, and it was very seamless to implement this. As you'll see the next slide, corporals only assume shift responsibility, shift supervisor responsibility when our sergeants are off. So if our sergeants are on duty, our corporals are that fourth or fifth police officer on the street. So they serve that dual duty. Majority of the time, they're going to be in that patrol officer function. But when the shift supervisor is off, our corporals will be imported into that supervisory role. And we found it to be very successful because we're very specific on what their roles are. So they still serve in the capacity of a shift supervisor, but they are not that squad supervisor. We don't expect them to take disciplinary action. We don't expect them to take anything outside of what their patrol duties are. But under the supervisory role, we want them to be directing our officers and making those decisions that a sergeant would make. And like I said, it's been very, very successful. We found it to be very efficient and effective. Structure based on what I talked about earlier, getting them ready to take on this next role. And they're gaining most of their valuable experience through that on-the-job training. They will get with their sergeant and spend a lot of time learning the role of a street sergeant by just working that shift with that sergeant. So there's a lot of OTJ going on, and then our sergeants do a marvelous job of mentoring our future supervisors. By also creating the corporals, we were able to delegate or designate a detective sergeant and an administrative sergeant at the same time without adding any staff at all. So we had these extra sergeants that before we had corporals were considered relief sergeants, and quite honestly they were very ineffective as a department, not them themselves, but as a department. A lot of times we had two sergeants on duty and we don't need two sergeants on duty, so we were able to reallocate them to this detective sergeant, which we desperately needed, and an administrative sergeant, which also proved to be extremely valuable. So we were very, very fortunate when it came to that.
Chief, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
How many corporals are there again?
4.
Okay.
So we have one assigned to each shift.
All right.
The 2 primaries, and the 4 primaries, I should say, 2 6 a.m.s and 2 6 p.m.s.
All right, thanks.
This is just some information that I think we should be very proud of as a city, is that I wanted to share with you. The FBI Unifying Crime Report indicates that the national average right now, well, actually based on the 2011 census, the most recent one, is that nationally per 1,000 citizens, the national average, or recommended average, I should say, is 2.4 officers per 1,000 residents that they serve. In Michigan, it's 1.9, and for us right today is 1.52. So we're right on track with what the recommendations are when it comes either from the national level, the state level, and then more appropriately at our local level. I'm very comfortable and very happy with the fact that we are very, very close to that. The next one just kind of gives you a snapshot of 5-year comparison. This is also found in our annual reports, and it goes into a little bit more detail. But I wanted to bring you up to speed on where we're at today at the end of 2019 as compared to 2015. The biggest areas that I'm looking at is in the Part 1 index crimes, and it might be a little small, but if you look at it close, the larcenies. Our larcenies have gone up. And if you have been to any of our neighborhood watch meetings or seen any of my monthly reports, you'll notice that I continue to make reference to our larceny from vehicles being on the uptick, or sometimes they level off. But that's what that's representative of. We're getting hit very, very hard citywide. And it's not just citywide, it is region-wide, with cars getting broken into, all crimes of opportunity, where we have residents parking their cars out in the driveway, unlocked, with valuables sitting in the front seat or on the center console. Those are the larceny reports that we're taking, where we have larceny from vehicle uptick. We've seen it level off a little bit from 17 to 18. Once again, it rears its ugly head quite frequently and regularly when it comes to seeing those numbers increase. In the Part 2 non-index crimes, you'll notice on the first one, the forgery counterfeit. We've seen quite a big jump from 25 last year reported incidents to 45 this year. And once again, that's not just citywide or regional-wise. This is national. We're seeing a lot of counterfeit activity going on. We're seeing a lot of forgery stuff going on. It's related to a lot of the internet crime, the cyber crime stuff that we're encountering. But more importantly, we're seeing a lot of the counterfeit bills getting produced and passed. So we're not immune to that either, but it's not specific to this area region. It's everywhere. And then one other area that's for me is of interest is the narcotics violations. You see a significant decrease in that, and that is due to the recent legislation for recreational marijuana or non-criminalization. So a lot of our prior narcotics complaints had to do with marijuana related. So we're seeing definitely a downtick in that. You want to do overlap? All right. Tag out.
Okay, Chief talked about the 4 primary shifts. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the overlap shift. We have 2 of those on the same days that the primary shifts go, so those shifts are from 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. There's 2 officers on each one of those shifts, and then we also have 1 other officer assigned to a 3 to 3 shift that is on a one-off rotation, and you'll see that on the next slide when we show that. Primary responsibility of the 3 to 3 is to cover shift change, which is at 6 p.m. The day shifters come off, night shift's getting ready to go on. If we didn't have the afternoon shift, there wouldn't be a police officer on the street. Typically, you'll see in some of our slides coming up, we are the most busiest between like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 1 o'clock in the morning. So if we didn't have that 3 to 3 shift, there'd be nobody responding to anything. Typically what we're doing though is back in our day when we were having kids, we took a couple days off. Now the new generation takes Family Medical Leave Act for 30 days. So these guys were moving people all over the place constantly to cover these shifts. So the 3 to 3 cars sometimes they're used on that shift primary, but normally they're for FMLA, injuries, military leave, and new officer training. This is a slide of our typical schedule. You got the 6A, 6P, and the 3A. Any questions on this schedule?
Shaded or days off?
Yeah, all the white is on, all the shade is off. Okay. 2013 versus 2019. You can see in 2013, 1 officer responses, we had 11,646. In 2019, we had 13,357. Look at the difference in the 2 officer responses. From 2013 to 2019, we had almost 7,000 more police responses due to the 2-person calls. 2-person calls examples are medicals, assaults, fights, domestic assaults, personal injury accidents, suicide, disorderly conduct, sexual assaults, and shots fired. All these calls 2 officers respond to. Because you can see from the stats from 13 to 19, things are getting more violent. Calls for service by the day of the week. We stay relatively level. You can see Friday's got a little jump, and then Sunday's not so busy. Time of the day. Time of the day jumps. The busiest time frame for 2019 responses is between 3 and 1 o'clock in the morning. There's all of our different calls for service we take. Next one. And there's just an overview of what we spend on each other.
What's all other entail?
So others are the less frequent calls we go on. So they'll include like mental, assist with mental. It might be
Noise complaints, barking dogs.
Yeah, I had Barb break it down for me. Annoying phone calls, barking dogs, hit and run private property, trespassing, building checks, suspicious situation, suicides or natural deaths, and missing persons. So those types of offenses are so infrequent, if we were to add them on this pie chart, it would be So she clumps them together, all other, for this illustration. But when we report our stats to the state, they are broken down by those categories.
Any questions on the slides that I did? No? Okay.
All right, the new Standale. Lake Michigan Drive corridor has obviously become the new Alpine, right? That's what we call it, the new Alpine down there. So we kind of been looking at the development over the years and seeing all this development going in, increasing the pedestrian traffic, all the new housing going in. So we were kind of asked to say, hey, what's this really look like down there? We all drive through there. We know what it's like, right? But so what we end up doing is a breakdown and did a heat map on this, which is really interesting. So what we did, we broke this down over a 5-year period, so 2008, 2013, and 2018, to give us an idea of how much this has grown in Standale. So we took all the calls of service from Leonard Street to O'Brien, so we just broke it down there, and then we went from the west border of Ottawa County to Maynard. So if you can kind of think of where that box is, that's what we're looking at. And this kind of came about when they planning was looking at doing the apartments and obviously all the development going on down there to see really what's going on down there with traffic and types of calls. So when you look at 2008, that's the one that's up there. You can kind of see the where it was. 2,231 calls. It breaks it down. It's kind of hard there, but again, Lake Michigan Drive corridor area there is where you can kind of see that. When we jump over to the 2013, we jump up. So this is kind of interesting to see how much it's kind of exploding down there. We all drive it, we all see it, we all know what's going on, but to really put some calls to service in there to see what these are. So obviously we jump up to the 3,472 calls, again, right in that whole corridor of Lake Michigan Drive and the traffic and everything. And this is every type of call. I mean, from barking dogs to crashes to fights to robberies, everything down there. So this includes every call from our database put into this into these services. Now when we jump to 2018, we even go up to more, so 4,162 calls. So it's pretty interesting to see how this is just expanding down there and becoming such a big area to us. Obviously we call it like our new Alpine. So this is, once we did this and we could see how much it's expanding down there, that's why we decided when we went to add that extra car on the shifts that we need an extra car in Standale when we went to the 5 cars during the daytime. Because if we have 2 cars on Alpine and we have 1 car in Standale, with this type of growth and amount of calls down there, it's just not working out. We have 1 car to cover this whole area. The calls in Standale have increased drastically, almost as much more, if not more, than the calls up on Alpine is where we're getting at. So obviously, I think we all kind of know it by driving there, but it's just interesting to see this map and how much it's really grown when we put it on a plot thing like this to see what's going on down there. So, back to you.
So let's talk about the why, how, and the what's. So the reason we're sharing this information with you, especially this last couple slides, is that traditionally and historically we've always considered Alpine as the busiest part of the city, and it traditionally has. But as you can see, Standale's certainly catching up to us. And with our calls for service, they're matched now when it comes to the Alpine Avenue corridor versus the Lake Michigan Drive corridor. And that really big, huge red blotch that you saw on there for 2018 was Wilson Lake Michigan Drive. It's our highest crash area for the city, and it's ranked really high countywide too, I believe. So as beautiful and as big and as wide open as that intersection is, we continue to struggle with crash activity there. So as Keith said, what we wanted to do is we sat down here when we were looking at the corporal positions to say, okay, how do we stay ahead of this? How do we stay ahead of this demand? How do we stay ahead of this growth that's coming? And we were fortunate enough to receive 2 additional officers back last year, and that's where we deployed this new strategy of putting the extra car on day shift, on both the day shifts, and then we actually was able to add that overlap offset officer. So when I say offset, that means we have 2 of them that are on Monday and Tuesday, and then they're off Wednesday, Thursday, and the other 2 are on Wednesday, Thursday. We take that extra person and put them on working Tuesday, Wednesday, has Thursday, Friday off. So it's a one offset. So at some nights, we have 3 of our 3P to 3A cars on. But it was designed exactly for this when we were trying to stay ahead of that growth down in Standale, where we never were able to dedicate that second car down there 24/7, where now today we can. So the what and the how, and what are some of our goals and objectives? So we continue to believe that it's going to continue to grow down in that region especially, but we're starting to see citywide growth. I'm sure you're all aware of that. So we're trying to stay ahead. We're trying to forecast where's our challenges going to be when it comes to maintaining the police services that we continue to, or that we provide today. So some of the areas that we talked about was addressing the demand and continue to provide the exemplary services become expected from our community members. That was the number one goal, was be prepared for what the demands are going to be while maintaining the level of service that we're able to provide today. So through the redeployment strategies, we were able to do that. We also created a strategic plan moving forward, which includes the opportunity to forecast what we have coming. And it talks about the next one as far as the why, and it goes back to what we talked about. Standale, what does it look like? You know, are we able to get by with just one car for a couple hours a night? And we think that it's not practical and it's not responsible to do that. So we need to dedicate that second car 24 hours a day, which we're accomplishing right now. The how. So this is where we talk about what have we got coming down the pipe. So right now, to maintain this coverage we have the 3P to 3A, the 2 additional officers in 2019 that I spoke of, which allows us to have that overlap shift rotation and the 1 officer. As Jason said, if we didn't have that overlap shift, we would have no patrol coverage on the hours of 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. as shift changes occurring. Moving forward, the vision is to continue to stay ahead of the anticipated city's growth and enhance the evening primary shift by adding a dedicated personnel. So what we're recommending to think about for the future is to add an additional officer that allows us to redeploy that offset officer that's on the 3P to 3A, bring them down to the night shift, and then add another officer onto that night shift to give us a complement of 5 officers on days, 5 officers on nights, maintaining that 3P to 3A. We eliminate the off shift, and then we would have to look at putting another personnel on for the night shift. That complement would add a couple different things. Number one, it would absolute guarantee that we'd have that 2 officer coverage in Standale. And unfortunately, that heat map doesn't give you a picture of the types of calls and the time of calls. We traditionally see a lull when it gets later at night, but as you saw on that graph, you know, we're busy. Our busiest times are well into the late evening, early morning hours, and at any given weekend especially, we don't know what we're going to be hit with at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So we're trying to maintain that steady coverage. So one area that we thought would be practical to discuss with you is having that additional officer, and what it would look like is this. Is have the 2 primary shifts, the 6 a.m., the 6 p.m., have our overlap shift, and it would look very similar to this. We could dedicate the 2 officers to the South District, 2 to the north. So when I say north, I'm talking Alpine Corridor, 3-mile corridor, North Ridge Corridor, and then, of course, south is everything south of Remembrance Road, Standale area. The problem that we continue to run into, we've historically run into it lately, not so much anymore, is when we didn't have the additional officers on the overlap shifts. As soon as an officer dropped off the primary shift, we were pulling from that overlap shift and losing that coverage to backfill for that absence on the primary. So we just kind of add a little historical knowledge. In 2005, our staffing level was 38 officers, sworn officers, the highest we've been, and that's where we're at today. Luckily, we're back up to where we were 15 years ago. To accomplish the above staffing commitment level that we're speaking of, it would require an additional officer bringing us up to 39. And then once again, we would remove that offset officer, redeploy to the night shift, thereby giving us 5 officers on each shift, 24 hours a day with a supervisor. So in conclusion, this is just gives you kind of a summary of the activity. Well, what we wanted to address was our activity, staffing levels, of course, And then, of course, forecasting the potential future needs. Any other questions that we didn't cover or any areas that we didn't hit on, our annual report will definitely address all those numbers or data or those stats, but we want to kind of give you a snapshot of where we're at, what it's looking like moving forward, and where we think we should be. So that's what this presentation was regarding tonight. So with that, we thank you for the time. Any questions we can address for you?
I just want to clarify, so you're saying we only need to hire one more officer to reach the staffing level you're looking for? Okay. Okay.
But one caveat to that is retirements that we have coming, we have to make sure that it's a plus one, it's not a,
Yes, it's an additional one.
correct,
Yes.
a net of one.
So, have you been able to anticipate it all? Sorry, have you been able to anticipate it all, based on census count? I mean, you talked about having an optimal number of officers per 1,000 citizens. Have you looked, like, how much have we grown in the last 10 years? Do you have a feeling for that, or is that something we need to be looking at?
Unfortunately, I think the latest census, of course, was the 2010 one, but it kind of gives us a ballpark of just shy of 25,000 residents.
Right.
I'm sure it's changed considerably after that, and I guess I haven't had the opportunity to see if there's a more specific number than that now. Or
Okay.
what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
We can only anticipate that it's going to continue.
Right,
It was
yeah.
happening.
Yeah, just a thought as we're looking to the future and hiring in that way. Thanks.
Commissioners?
I have a question. I'm just curious, can you talk about what services you offer to your officers who are dealing with, I guess I was looking at the suicide numbers in particular. I'm sure they're trained in dealing with these kinds of things, but what do you have in place to help them deal with situations like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Luckily, we were able to join forces with a specific EAP this year. Us and Fire, we actually contracted services with Back in the Badge. And what that is a peer support, it's a employee assistance program that deals specifically in public safety. So if an officer or a firefighter has issues related to the functions of the job, they're going to meet with counselors or peer support that are in the field that we are in. I know that both Fire and ourselves have had personnel go there already and very beneficial reports back. We encourage it. We actually had EAP, Back in the Badge EAP, come into one of our trainings 2 months ago and do a presentation. And really, we are promoting the use of that organization. And in fact, it's interesting you said that. We had a conversation an hour ago with one of our officers about, the trauma that we all went through back in 2011 when Trevor was killed.
Right.
And it was totally different back then, the peer support. It was there in place, but it was just at a different level. And I don't know if the acceptance or the understanding was there back then as far as our culture, our being the police culture, that it's okay to get help. It's okay to say, hey, I have a problem. So it's really nice now to see we turn that corner now in our field, in our profession, that we really promote that and that we encourage our officers to get that support. They don't get charged anything. It's all confidential. And like I said, I know that a couple of staff have realized it.
Great, thank you.
I'd just like to, I don't have so much questions as I do, when Alpine Avenue, you always see cars up there, they're either 2 cars going to Meyer, or you see a traffic accident, there's always something, they're busy. And to have the number of 2 cars per call triple that number. And when you got 3 people out on the north end, and you got to send 2 cars to 1 call, that 1 car is now short 2 cars. So, to me, and I see growth, and I see the future of what's coming, and we hear always what our constituents want as far as the speeding cars going, let alone the mass calls you get. And so, I hate to differ with you, Greg, but when you're asking for one, and I look at the numbers, I think you should be asking for two.
I agree.
But I'm just saying that that would be a minimum because staffing, young or old, people are going to time off as part of the program. And so I know you allow for some of that, but like I say, that the two-person calls, and so that's where the safety and welfare of the one guy that's left, let alone the two people that are on that one call. But so if the 3-to-3 car increased by one shift, then that would also give you something to pull from, I guess. But I'm not going to tell you how to run the department, but I'm just saying that I
You
think
might.
two people would be great, so.
Yeah, it's a very valid point, but we looked at it, we sat back and looked at it, we tried to look at it from a very practical standpoint. And then most importantly, trying to figure out, forecast what it's gonna look like moving forward. And the model we have in place, the one I'm speaking of, addresses those concerns that we're addressing today. The big issue is what do we got coming down the road, and
Right.
Jason alluded to, we already know that like our staff absences have gone up quite a bit due to different circumstances, whether it be FMLA, injury, extended leave. We have one officer that's in reserves for military leave. So those are the ones we can anticipate and then we know that we're gonna have to address. But more importantly, what do we got that we don't know about? So I think your point is very valid. But what we did is we addressed it from the practical standpoint of what we're seeing today. We went back that 5-year window to see, what were we doing back 5 years ago with the staff levels we had? And you're absolutely right. It was extremely dangerous back then because we did a lot of these 2-officer calls with one officer. That's just because that's what we had to do. So now today we're very focused on the officer wellness part of it, making sure that our officers are prepared, but more importantly, giving them the tools to keep them safe, to keep them on track. So I agree with your point, but what we wanted to do is at least plant that, thinking about it, knowing that coming down the road, we gotta pay attention to it.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you guys, when you're looking at your strategy, you're stay ahead, be prepared, and look forward. And maybe you will need more than one officer, but maybe you want to start with one officer and see what the future growth looks like and maybe find a place. But I like the way that you've kind of taken the people that you have that have experience within the department and you've placed them in other areas, kind of shuffled your deck a little bit. That's a good strategy. And I also really like the photo board of your police department. I think that's really good connectivity for the commission itself to get what officer is in what role and what that person actually looks like so that we can put a face with a name. I really applaud you on that. And I was surprised, happily surprised, to learn that your 38 officers' average age was 36.6. That is something that was not true a few, 5 years ago. I know that was always been a struggle of yours, so I applaud you with that. What other notes do I have? You're looking good tonight, Greg. That was the only note I had on there, too.
Another thing of interest I thought I'll just share with you very quickly is I just had a report sent to me today from Clerk, which is the I'll come back to that. Anyways, it's a national foundation out of DC and it does analysis of police services, law enforcement in general. And it was that's where you get the 21st Century Policing Report that President Obama ordered. But this organization does a lot of analysis and stuff. I was really excited because I got this report today about 12 takeaways to improve recruitment and retention. So it gives 12 pointers on how to improve our recruiting, our retention, because it is so important. We spoke about earlier, the recruitment part of it is pretty much, it's not too hard because we have some great young officers that really shared with the mayor, our latest hire that we offered a conditional offer to, she's currently in the academy. She had 2 conditional officers from neighboring agencies, significantly larger agencies, with a little bit more benefits and money perhaps. She chose Walker because of the environment, the culture of the department, and what does she want out of her career. Well, this report makes me very proud because it's hitting on some of the areas that we already have. And one of them is monitoring your workforce demographics. What do we got to pay attention to when it comes to recruiting our new officers? You know, what's important? It's adaptability. We have to adapt to the new generation, to the new officers. Also, it's all too, we got to understand that they think differently, they're motivated differently, and it's on us to make sure that we provide that for them. The second thing was build trust in your communities. And that is one of the things that probably struck me the hardest is we have such a good working relationship with our community, with our citizens, with our groups, with our businesses. It's all based on the efforts of these officers that are out there every day, these 19 officers and sergeants that are out there every day, building that trust, that transparency that we strive for within our community, our culture, for our citizens. So that one I'm very, very happy with. The third one, seek recruits who are comfortable with the 21st century policing model. And that's the one that President Obama ordered. And the 21st century policing model is built on technology. You have to stay ahead with these technologically advanced. That's where I fail, but that's where I have these guys. Because technology, I can turn on the computer, I think, without assistance, but other than that, these guys, these young officers are coming in, and these guys staying on top of that when it comes to being technologically advanced. That's what draws this new generation in. So when you see the photos of our cruisers, it's pretty impressive that we have that setup in those cars. That's a very nice setup that we have compared to some other agencies. We've had the opportunity to look at some other departments. We're very, very advanced when it comes to that. The next one, more training may be needed in the workforce overall level of experience. Succession planning, staff development. We have to pay attention to succession planning and staff development because the fear is that this younger generation now likes to come into a workforce, and if they don't get challenged enough, if they get bored or they get complacent, they move on. So our job is to keep them engaged, to provide staff training opportunities, advancement opportunities, go to different seminars, events, experiences, to keep them engaged and to continue to want or have them want to continue to work for us. Develop new strategies for recruiting officers with needed skills. So once again, the non-traditional officer, the non-traditional, just because you grew up in a family of police officers does not make you automatically a great police officer. One of our recent hires came to us with a degree in communications. Perfect. Communications or something outside of that traditional tunnel of law enforcement. So we're always looking for those opportunities. The additional hire I spoke of earlier, she's currently a physical education teacher in the Grand Public School System. What a great experience she's going to bring to our agency. She's going to bring some great experiences. Find new ways to recruit diverse workforce. So that's where we're really got to start working on that. We continue to work on that through our recruiting efforts. We get to different academies. We get to different functions. One of the greatest opportunities is the pastor network. We start partnering, start sharing information saying that we really want to recruit and hire a diverse workforce. We really are in good shape when it comes to that opportunity down at Grants Community College, especially because they have an avenue where we can start getting in front of some of these recruits, in front of these students to talk about the opportunities that we provide for them. We're still working hard on that. Ensure that your recruiting messages reflect the reality of the police work. So once again, what is our philosophy? What is our values? We share that right up front. The best way we share that we're finding from our recruits or from our candidates is through our Facebook, our website, and through the word of mouth of our officers. So we're very, very proactive when it comes to sharing that message and what we stand for. What is our philosophy? What is our community engagement philosophy? What's important to us at the Walker Police Department? So the message is very consistent and it's shared frequently. Eliminate unnecessary delays in the job application process. We've done that, we streamlined that through the assistance of our HR director. She's been fantastic work with getting that information out. We work very well together on that, and we work as a team when it comes to deciphering through the different applications, etc. So that's helpful. Retention of officers is critically important. Use exit interviews to learn why officers leave your department. Here's a beautiful thing about our department. People don't leave, they retire. So when you ask them why you leave them, you just say, because I'm old and I want to not work anymore. That's a good sign. We don't usually lose people to other agencies or any other competing forces. It's usually that they do a full career. I'm not saying it's going to be consistent, but I'm very proud of the fact that we continue to maintain that model. That, most of our officers are not leaving, or we don't have officers leaving to go to other agencies. And that's the biggest priority I put on our recruiting team, saying recruiting is one thing. Getting out there, getting in front of the candidate population is one thing. The challenge is going to be how do we keep our talent? How do we keep retaining those officers that are a perfect fit for us and that they're a benefit to the agency, that benefit to the city? That's where us and the supervisors come into play when it comes to the challenging them, motivating them, and then really what I'd really like to do is share with them how valuable they are to us. So I send that message quite often to them, the value they hold as an officer of our agency. Development opportunities, once again we talk about training, that helps with retention. So we provide the opportunities for training. We encourage, we elicit information from our officers on what do you want to do? What are some of your career goals? What's going to make you happy to stay here, a professional officer with us? And what can we do to help you get there? Whether it's training, assignments. So we're really open to that. Well, to your point, Commissioner, what are some of the needs for work-life balance and wellness? So what we do is we blend that. We blend that work-life balance and wellness. So we bring in, just 2 months ago, we brought in yoga for everybody as one example. Yoga, talking about how do you relax your mind, your body. We brought in speakers on nutrition. We brought in speakers on emotional wellness. How do you maintain that emotional connectivity? We reinforce and we really promote the fact that family comes first for officers. Your family has to be your foundation. From there, you're happy, you're going to be happy coming in to work with us. So we really focus on that and create that family environment in the agency. And lastly, we need to meet employees' need for, I'm sorry, I got to change it. Be willing to rethink old ways of doing business. So the 12th one is be willing to rethink old ways of doing business, and that goes back to what I talked about, the adaptability. We must adapt to our new generation officers coming out, and we must understand the new generation, what's important to them, what motivates them, and we have to provide that for them to keep them engaged. So this report, I just received like at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I started reading through it. I'm like, holy smokes, man, we're doing pretty well. I'm pretty excited that we're hitting a lot of the high points. We've got some challenges, of course, to continue, but that just kind of, in my mind, reaffirms the work that we're putting forward is relevant, and it's what people are seeing in the industry right now. So I thought I'd share that with you. It wasn't part of the presentation. These guys didn't know I had it, so I thought I would really throw it out there because of the fact that I'm extremely proud of our agency for, hitting most of those. So we're not. Thanks for the time. I appreciate that.
Commissioners, anything else? Dale?
Hey, Greg, can you provide a quick update of where you are in the certification process for the commission? I know that's something you guys have been working on for a year now or more.
So the accreditation process is still, just to give you an overview, the accreditation process is, we're going with the state accreditation. The state accreditation basically certifies our agency as an accredited agency, a certified agency, because quite honestly, in the state of Michigan, if he wants to start a police department tomorrow, he can. There's no criteria, there's some standards and such, but you can go and anybody can start their own police department. We had no checks and balances in place as to what does a professional police department look like. What is it? What do we have to maintain? What do we have to achieve? And what do we have to continue to strive for? So the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police created this accreditation process. And if you ever heard of CLIA, the national level certification, this is kind of a step down from that. But we have to maintain civilian staff and ourselves on this committee, and we went through and we did a complete review of our existing policy and procedure manual, which hadn't been done in a number of years. So as a group, we got together, we did that. Where we're at today after that is now the three of us meet weekly, and we're putting together the updates and the manual formatting together in a software package that we have, and we're getting close. I mean, every week we go, oh boy, we got a lot more to go, but we're getting close to getting that completed. Once that's completed, it'll be formatted in the accreditation format, which is what we're doing as we go along. And then hopefully by the end of the first quarter this year to apply with the MACP for the accreditation. That gives us 2 years to achieve what we have to achieve and be certified. Once we receive that accreditation, we are an agency of professional standards, and that we are held accountable to those professional standards by a committee that continues to evaluate and does an inventory and an audit of us every year. So it's kind of right now there's 19 agencies in the state, there are 23 agencies in the state that have it, but we want to be one of those as we continue. But thanks for asking, that's good question. It's been a long trip.
If there's nothing further, then I have two last things, both positive. I think the first is to acknowledge and appreciate for a couple of us that have been up here for a little while now. It used to be we waited until somebody retired. Then maybe a few weeks, a month or so later, we might post the job at that point. Different time, different leadership, what have you. I want to acknowledge and appreciate that proactive strategy, because we know who's retiring for the most part this coming year, and we're already steps ahead of it. So those spots are getting filled, so we don't have that loss of the brain drain walking out the door. I think it's very important for the continuity of the department. And then the second thing is, it's a watch out for us. We can very easily look at just the residential statistics and and I've caught myself doing this, and looking at just the population count. What's it going to be this next census? Are we going to get enough people out? Are we going to be close to 26,000? We'll be 25 and a half. We have, and Julie Block had that, she's got that great slide that shows how many workers we actually have that work in the city and then leave. So we have an influx of workers coming in the city, professional for the most part, a lot of manufacturing as well, and they're coming into the city. That creates calls for service as well. And then the other caveat to that is the actual retail development that we have primarily in that Standell area. A lot of retail fraud calls for service are coming up, and so those are those things. If it's not, I don't want to be, because I've caught myself doing it, looking at just this population number. We have businesses that really kind of blow up during the day from a size perspective. All the workers coming in, and then secondly, the retail quarter as well. And those really aren't factored in the population numbers, but I think we have to take into account. It sounds like you are with that heat map. I like looking at the data statistics and making decisions from there. So anyway, thank you. We're not reacting to things anymore. We're ahead of it. So.
Like I said, any questions that come up or pop up, the annual report should address most of them, but if not, feel free to reach out to any one of us. And the office is always open for who I want. That's where we're going to get most of your questions answered, because we really encourage that to get in that car with an officer, close the door, and go, okay, tell me about what's going on there.
Also do the night shift, let alone the day shift.
Yeah.
Life changes
6 a.m. to
dramatically.
6 p.m. is too easy. You got to do the 6 p.m. to 6 a. And then you feel it for a couple days. Yeah.
It's amazing the different world it is, because I think I was on nights for almost 20 years, working the street, and when I came to days, it was weird. It's a totally different environment, obviously, but our young officers thrive and love that night shift because of the activity, and they get to be proactive, and they get to go out and do what they call police work. And love it. And you do a great job. It's a marvelous job. But by all means, at any time, you like to do that, you can certainly set that up. Anytime they come tour the building, feel free to just kind of give you a couple of areas of interest that
Thanks for the information. Appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen. We are good. Thank you. Well, I will start to the right, and we'll make our way left here. We have our staff reports this evening, so we'll start with the clerk's office. Thanks again, guys.
We will be hopefully receiving our absentee ballots on Thursday and hope to get them back out in the mail, turn them around by next Tuesday. So we've had half of the applications for absentee ballots back. So they're, a lot of people won't vote in this election. As for the clerk's department itself, I'd like to thank everybody that was part of supporting the renovation. It's complete in the clerk's department, and feel free to come down and see it. It was all completed on Friday, so it was less than 2 weeks from start to finish with painting and remodeling. So it's really going to help us with the 2020 election year, the increased passport volume, and the improved customer service with dealing with people that can register to vote and vote in person those 2 weeks before the election. I do expect a line out the door those 2 weeks prior to the elections. So thank you again.
Thank you. Commissioner Gilbert?
I'm all set.
Yep. Commissioner Glanville?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. One for Daryl, I think, on the traffic. I was looking at the staff reports. So out of engineering, there was an item where towards the bottom of the first page, so it's page 37 in the packet, sort of. I'm not sure how they're numbered, but it says 37. At any rate, it talks about that we did not receive the safety grant for the turn lanes on Richmond and Wilson, and that they're going to follow up on that. And I was just wondering if there is any opportunity or what we can do to engage, to support that effort. Is there some citizen engagement that might be helpful or something along those lines, and how we might, like I said, just kind of get in there and help support that effort as they work to.
Yeah, I can follow up with Scott and MDOT to see if they have any suggestions for that, but yeah, as you probably all know, they're very competitive grants statewide, so I think they just ranked them, and that was not the highest ranking
Sure.
at the time, but can
Yeah,
find
like I said,
out to see if they
if
have
there's
any
anything we
helpful-
can do, I
Yeah.
know, obviously, we hear it every day.
Yep.
There's a lot of interest in that being successful, so I think we could get some positive community response on that. So.
Oh, I'm sure we can, especially on that one. Every time we have an accident there.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to do was just take a moment to commemorate, of course, that it is Martin Luther King Day today. And I had the opportunity to read his letter from a jail at Birmingham this morning, which was not a piece that I had read in the past. And what he focuses on a lot there is direct action. And it just really struck me that the responsibility that we bear as a group to be in that position of taking direct action. And what he's talking about, it was really interesting because, of course, he wrote these in 1963, and here we are in 2020, where we see a lot of that, posting online, like, I support you, or everybody's doing this, like, social media engagement that doesn't necessarily go very far. And just as a reminder to myself, how, really important this role is for our citizens and what we do here. So I thought that was just really nice, and I wanted to mention that. And if you have a chance, if you haven't ever read the letter from a jail in Birmingham, it's quite a piece. So I would highly recommend it. And that's all I got.
Thank you. Commissioner Groders?
I just wanted to share about a book that I'm reading, and I might recommend it to everyone. It is called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. It is written by two friends, actually. They were college roommates, and one is a Democrat and one is a Republican. They have a blog, and they just encourage conversation as opposed to proving your point or whatever. So very contentious times. I just want to kind of encourage us to read the book if you can. Actually, I downloaded the audio, and the audio is read by the two of them, so that does make it kind of that helps as well. But a couple of statements here that struck me. One is, sometimes we refrain from talking politics, but we never actually stopped talking politics altogether. We just stopped talking politics with people who disagree with us. Another one that was interesting to me that I think we really need to keep in mind is approval ratings for politicians in both parties have bottomed out, and our faith in public and private institutions is at an all-time low. So I just want to encourage us to be the example of people who can focus on the common good and making good decisions, and remember why we're here and who put us here. And that is all.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Mezzinger?
I'm all set.
Commissioner Shane?
Thank you, Commissioner Glanville and Gruters. Those are two reading things I'll put on my list. Thank you. I do believe in be the best you can be. I also, in the spirit of reading, I was really thrilled when looking through the staff reports, Walker branch of Kent District Library. I was really happy about their county-wide reading program designed to help the young and beginning readers pass the new Michigan Reading Proficiency. I thought that was really a great program, and that we have 193 children in Walker registered already. That is so cool. I thought that was really a neat thing to have locally. And other than that, nothing. Thank you. I thought great, or I do think that the police department did a great job. I just love their enthusiasm, and I like the data that they speak with, so they did a great job.
Thank you. Commissioner Kent?
I'd just like to thank DPW for spending their weekend working. And somebody sent me this probably for a reason, but I thought I'd share it. We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Also, thank you. Daryl?
A couple of things. First of all, thanks. Like as Dan said, DPW did an awesome job this weekend, and the timing was perfect on if you couldn't have a snowstorm hit at a better time than the weekend, and the timing for them to get out and clean things up. So awesome job to them, and thanks to PD for a great presentation showing the strength of that department for sure. Gave Frank the night off tonight. As you know, he's doing double duty and things are busy in CDD. But related to that, we expect this week to make an offer to hopefully our next planning director. So we'll see how that shakes out hopefully by the end of the week. So had a couple of good candidates, and I think we settled on one that'll do a fine job for us. So working on that. I've got budget meetings starting this week with some of the departments to begin to develop next year's budget. So I think we got probably a little preview of PD tonight of what they'll be looking for, at least on the staffing perspective. And I think you heard from Dave in the fire a couple weeks ago too, so I'm sure there'll be a similar request there. So we'll be meeting with the larger departments the first week in February. So more to follow on that. That's consuming the majority of my time these days. And then last but not least, this morning we received 2 offers on the Edison House. We had that listed, as you know, we had that posted for a couple of weeks, and we received one but from a family for $70,000, and then an additional offer from the folks that own the Quality Edge building for $120,000 for the site and the house. So I guess I just share that information with you and would like to move forward with probably the Quality Edge. That meets our policy of the higher bid. So they had asked that we begin to negotiate a purchase agreement. All we received was a letter proposal at this point. I could forward that on to you so you could see what the terms are there for both of them. And you know, I don't absolutely need a decision tonight, but maybe next Monday I could send you the info and we could make give me some direction that how the commission would like to proceed next Monday. If you would, I would appreciate that.
Is that something then for next week you could share as far as the information?
Sure, yeah.
And then let's put that as a potential resolution for next week.
Yeah, yeah.
And if anybody has any questions, just Daryl directly on that.
Yeah,
I
I
think-
think Sarah's got the result, at least the results posted already on the website this morning. We had the bid opening at 9 o'clock or so, yeah, 2 proposals that came in. So, yeah, we'd like to move forward on that one if possible. I know that's been a high priority for the commission for a couple of years, so.
Well, and it's, you know, as the years go on, I mean, it's been 18 years now. It'll be 18 years this November 1st, since we moved that house from the corner. And one of the things that when I think of this last year, Daryl, I've lost track of how many times we've had to kick squatters out of there, and then we have to have pay to have the house come in and cleaned up because they're using bathrooms where there are no bathrooms in there. And obviously, it's a really challenging situation. Windows are getting busted out. It's if this were a residence, it would probably be cited as a public nuisance. Is what it's becoming. So I think more on this, but I think if you can get the background information from the offers, we can take a look at it and potential resolution then next week, take action. So, okay. Just 2 quick things for me. One was a week ago Friday, was fortunate enough to have the county administrator, Wayman Britt, came out and spent about half the day with me. We spent time touring some of the city buildings and then also went out to the development sites in and around Walker. I value the relationship. I know I speak for Daryl and staff as well, from our, you know, the respective chairs that our relationships really are strong because we have proactive conversations. We work collaboratively together, and it was nice to be able to have that time with them and give him a little really behind the scenes look of what's making the city grow here. And then secondly was last Tuesday night we had we welcomed just close to about 60 people for the Michigan Municipal League, the newly elected officials training academy. And there was actually a mix. There was people that had been in office for quite some time. There were some newly elected officials as well, but it was just a great turnout. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell Julie Zalewski and anybody else that had helped her for just, I mean, we shined. I was standing by the door at the end of the night greeting people, and it's interesting the amount of people gone on. I lost track, somewhere between 12 and 15 different municipalities that made a point. We just had a mayor's roundtable, and so people knew that I was representing the city. I was standing by the door, thanking everybody for coming, and 12, 15 different people had made a specific beeline over to say, thank you, beautiful facility, wish we had something like this. So I think kudos to city staff. I mean, you wouldn't realize this is, what, nearly 30 years old at this point, Daryl?
20.
20. So I like nearly 30 better, but so it's but it's still still something we can be very proud of. So anyway, without anything else, we can stand adjourned for the evening. Thank you.